Hello, everyone. I am so thankful that you're here to listen to this episode. But before we begin, I want to name that this episode includes conversation about child loss, medical trauma, grief, anxiety, and the way a family keeps living after the unimaginable happens. A few episodes ago, I was lucky enough to sit down with Angie VanAntwerp, and we talked about the loss of her son, Connor, who died just before his 4th birthday. Today, I get the honor of sitting down with her husband, Patrick, because grief doesn't land the same way on every person in a family. And this is why I wanted this podcast to exist. Not because stories like this are easy to hear. They're not. This one's hard. But because mental health doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens inside families, inside marriages, hospital rooms, faith, work, inside the moments when someone goes back to their normal life while carrying something that has completely changed them. We can talk clinically about grief, trauma, anxiety, anger, avoidance, and coping, and we will. But stories like Patrick's help us understand what those words actually look like in real human life. In this conversation, Patrick talks about sweet little Connor, the little boy who made him a dad. He talks about the 5 days in the hospital that are still vivid in his mind 10 years later, something he thinks about daily. He talks about being the one in the room with doctors absorbing information no parent should ever have to hear. He talks about marriage, faith, therapy, medication, anxiety, anger, and what it means to be a dad to 4 children when only 3 of them are at home. This episode isn't about tying grief up into a clean lesson. Obviously, that doesn't exist. He was a little boy who sang "Jesus Loves Me" under the kitchen table, built rockets with his dad, wanted a bike, wanted a skateboard, and he's the child that made Patrick a father. So today we are honoring Connor, and we're making space for the kind of grief men carry when they're trying to be strong, trying to be useful, trying to hold their family together, and still falling apart too. This is my conversation with Patrick VanAntwerp. Let's just get started. I had your lovely wife on the podcast.
Yeah.
And she did a really great job, although she didn't listen to it herself, which I feel like is so Angie.
Has she still not listened to it?
She told me she hadn't. She's like, friends told me it was good. And I was like, yeah, it was really good.
I told her it was good. I listened to it. And that's that was the first time when you asked me to join. And I was like, wait, Angie did one of these? Because I had no idea. I don't even think she told me that she was doing it. She says she told me.
We're going to have to figure out the facts of that. Like, was Angie in the wrong because she didn't tell you, or were you not listening?
I think it's going to depend on who you ask.
Yeah. Well, she did a great job. And she mentioned that her grief journey was and is different than yours. And so I wanted to get that perspective. Maybe this isn't true, but I feel like women get a lot of the grief support, and men feel a little bit more isolated in their support, and or men don't maybe talk about it in the same way as women do. And so I kind of wanted to dive into that because I'm married to someone who's very emotional and comes back from dates with his guy friends, and they've talked about very real things. But I think a lot of times men don't always do that. So I don't know where you fall on the spectrum of that, but we're going to get into it.
Let's get into it. But I think I know where I fall on the spectrum, but it's not the same as your husband.
And you're the perfect person to be on the podcast because we can ask why the hell that is. I would love to just start talking about Connor. And I don't know if that's going to be too emotional of a start, but just kind of thinking back to who he was, what he liked, the silly things he said. Also, you're allowed to cry.
I don't have any tissue, so it's going to be awkward if I cry or I'll be using my sleeve. So Connor James VanAntwerp is our firstborn son who really made me a dad.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what's pretty special. Transitioning from a husband to husband and a dad, a lot of that centers around Connor and he being the child that did that for us. When I think back about him, he's your firstborn son. There's everything you do is a first, right? It's the first time you learn to change diapers, and it's the first time you learn to feed a bottle and how to soothe the crying baby in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Those are core memories. But, I think there's other memories that go along with Connor that make me smile. There's a couple of videos that are some of my favorites, and it's Connor singing underneath the kitchen table, playing with his very first Lego set that we were able to build together, and just singing "Jesus Loves Me." There's some other good photos of building rockets. So we got to build like a rocket together. I remember taking him out. That was something I used to do as a kid. And then you take him out and you launch the rocket. And the look of awe of like, I'm pushing a button, this thing that we made together is flying through the air, and the excitement of watching it come down in a parachute and going to get it and then doing it all again. The first bike that we went to go get, it was only a few weeks, maybe a month before he passed away. I remember on a Saturday deciding we were going to go down a cycle recycle and see if we could find him a bike, right? Like one of the things he was asking for. And kind of that proud moment of watching him get to walk a bicycle out of the store with his training wheels on it, and like how excited he was, right, of having that new thing. So we definitely have lots of great memories. And those are the things that make me smile. Like his innocence, his flexibility. At the time, Angie and I were youth leaders. We took Connor to Colorado with a bus full of kids. I think he was a month old.
Oh my goodness.
Right, petrified as I was to be this brand new parent, like I had Angie next to me saying like, no, we could still do this. Like we can do it. Like we don't have to think through all the logistics that go along with it. We'll just jump on the bus and we'll go. And so like he was the kid that just came along with us for things. And so things like that, where I think a kid got off that bus, after 22 hours or something, was like, wait, there was a baby on here?
Oh
just
my gosh.
just had no idea. Right. So those are the things that, I remember about Connor and kind of speak to who he was. Just a carefree, like innocent, flexible kid.
So hard. Our first is a boy. There is something so special about like that first kid. Because you just don't even know. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know where it's going. And it's like innocent for you guys too, in a way, right? Like, let's jump on a bus and go to Colorado with a newborn, and you don't have all of the worries and the fears of the what ifs, which I feel like is a gift as a first time parent. That says you guys were doing something right. See?
Maybe we were naive. I don't know.
He was this really special boy, and then just the unimaginable happened. And maybe just walk us through when everything changed for you guys and what that was like from your vantage point.
I was supposed to be leaving for, I think, Mexico at the time for work. I was like leaving the next day when it all happened. And so I canceled that trip. I was in a new job at the time and having to like call and say like, hey, I can't go. I'm in the hospital with my kid. And we were like, it was just fresh at that time.
Okay.
One of those first signals of this isn't going to be a quick visit for us. Dillan, you talk about the comparison between Angie and I think this is going to be one of the places that it's very different.
Okay.
Angie talked about how she's a nurse. I'm an engineer. And so I think up until now, Angie had been really responsible for like medical care for our kids, right? The roles very much reversed during crisis. Angie had been at work on Saturday. And so at the time we had Connor and Holland was just under 2. And it was a typical morning that Connor woke up not feeling well, said he had a headache, and which is a little strange for a 4-year-old, but also a little bit of nausea. And so kind of laid in bed, had a pretty quiet day. Towards the end of that day, came out of his room and, did normal kid things, like had some screen time, ate and had popsicles. And looking back, there are some things that could have been clues, but ultimately, like it was just a kid that didn't feel well.
Yeah.
I ended up spending the night with him that night. Like I slept on his trundle bed. And by the morning, and he woke up a couple times the night and did some things that were strange, having difficulty walking, trying to get to his water. And then by the time we woke up in the morning, had that sense deep inside that something wasn't right. Like this wasn't a normal cold anymore.
Yeah.
With like seeing balance issues and things. So loaded him in the car and took him to the ER. And I remember carrying him down the long ramp at the hospital and walking in. And, you go to check in, and the people there are well trained enough to know like you need to go right back. You have got a kid in your arms who really is, just doesn't look right. And so they took us right back, put us into triage. Doctors come in advocating for, hey, my kid's having balance issues. It's not the first thing they go look for. But having to advocate for that during the kind of the time of the tears and crying that were going on with Connor, because he seemed to be in some pain, and advocating for that and end up getting a CAT scan, and then it gets read right away. And I think that's where it changed, very much like a movie scene where, you get back from CAT scan, you've been there for a couple minutes and it's kind of quiet. And the doctor comes in, sits down right next to you and says, Connor has had a stroke. And I think as parents, we knew something had happened, but you don't ever associate stroke with a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Hearing those words together, that was the moment you knew like it wasn't going to be easy. Like it
Yeah.
wasn't going to be right anymore. So they did lots of things.
Were you by yourself when this all happened and Angie was with Holland, or was she there at that point?
Good question. I had taken Connor by myself,
Right.
and she was working on getting childcare for Holland and had
Uh-huh.
met me at the hospital. So by that time,
Okay.
we were both together. So they had already kicked off their emergency plan at the hospital, and we're on the phone with Mott's, U of M Children's Hospital, and
Mm.
Helen DeVos, trying to figure out what the right procedure was to handle a 4-year-old who had a stroke. We ended up at Helen DeVos. They air flighted us there. I rode in the helicopter with Connor, and then you get to Helen DeVos, and it's a whole nother thing. A dozen nurses running around. There's doctors. Everybody's in the room. They all have their job. You're standing there next to your kid, and just trying to stay out of the way, and the people are both buzzing around. Pretty incredible health systems that are really focused on kids, and we are super thankful for that. Connor ended up going to surgery to relieve pressure on his brain. That was their biggest concern after the stroke. It all kind of blends together, but we were ultimately in the hospital for I think 5 days. He never really came back or made any progress after surgery. Continued to degrade. Remember, like the night they called in, and he had a midline shift, so it was when all the pressure from one side of his brain had really pushed onto the other side.
Mm.
And that was scary. That was another step in the wrong direction for us. And then that's when the doctors ask you to make some really hard decisions.
Yeah.
Throughout this time, the 5 days in the hospital, this is where, like, maybe as that engineer or maybe as the husband or the male figure, you step up and you take over the crisis situation.
Yeah.
So this is where, like, despite Angie being a nurse and being able to communicate really well with doctors, she
Mhm.
wasn't part of those conversations. She
Yeah.
just wanted to be a mother.
Yeah.
That left me to have those conversations. Maybe it was the logical brain talking with the doctors, but you get to have those tough conversations. You have to listen to the information and kind of ask those tough questions. But we ultimately were faced with another surgery that would, I don't know what it's called. They were basically going to take out the dead half of his brain. I remember like that being like, that's so dramatic. You know enough from biology, like he would never ever be the same. Like even if we came
Yeah.
out of this, like he wouldn't be that innocent, loving little boy that we had anymore. I know that seems kind of graphic, but that was like a pivotal decision. And Angie and I kind of came together. And I remember being alone, kind of hearing that that was the decision we were going to have to make, and coming back to Angie with some fear that that's what she would pick. I think I knew that's not what I wanted, and not what I wanted, maybe because I don't know if I didn't want to have to deal with that,
Mm.
or I didn't want to have to support Connor in that way, or I don't know what the reason was, but there's some guilt and probably why. But coming to Angie and kind of presenting her with those options, and the piece when she said, "Heaven is a better place for our son than this earth will
Mm.
ever be." The piece of being on the same page, the piece of knowing like we weren't going to exasperate something and we could let him go home to live with Jesus. There's a lot of peace in there, but that's when we made our decision to let him go and know that that was God's plan and we could stop interfering. It still wasn't easy. Like I remember calling David Culp, our pastor at the time, and asking him, when is it okay for humans to step in and do everything we can versus like giving up and giving it to God? I don't think that's ever a very clear and easy decision. We have a lot of power as humans. We could do a lot of crazy things, and it's hard to know when all those resources are right to use and not right to use.
Yeah. Sometimes I just really don't know what to say. I mean, it's so sad. Like, every time I hear you guys talk about your story, like you said, you're not gonna cry, and I'm like, "Okay, yeah, cool, me neither," because, like, it's so sad. It's so heart-wrenching, you know?
It is, Dylan. You're absolutely right. You asked about the differences, and I don't know how it lives in Angie's head, but this is one of those things like the time in the hospital that lives in my head constantly.
Yeah.
Like it probably comes back down to how my brain works and kind of who I am, but it lives in my head extremely vividly. And it's one of those things that, as you remember Connor, this is the thing that I remember all the time. Like you relive those, I'll call them horrific moments, but
Yeah.
there's also a lot of good and happy moments in those that we're really thankful. Like there's a lot of things we're thankful for from DeVos, from the doctors who could speak clearly with us, and the extra support they had to give Angie a room in the hospital and some other things like that, that I think they went
Mm,
above and beyond, and we're super thankful for. We're super thankful to have family members and friends who came and, were just present. They weren't with us. They weren't allowed to be in the room with Connor. They were really limited on who could come in there, but
sure.
they sat outside the PICU, pediatric intensive care, and they were just present, and we knew they were there, and that's what counted.
Yeah, that's what Angie came back to a lot, is the community of people that you had through these last 10 years. Like, I can't believe it's been 10 years.
That's what's really hard. Like, to step back when you're like, this wasn't yesterday. It wasn't
Yeah.
last week. It never leaves, and it's been 10 years. And I don't know
Yeah.
that it gets that much easier.
You had said that there's these differences even just within the hospital. Do you want to share more about doing the logistics, talking to the doctors? Did you feel like you were forced into that role, or did you take it kind of like, this is how I can support my family in this situation?
I think it's the latter. I think as a married couple, you kind of get a sense of where your spouse can support and can't. And I
Yeah.
think quickly knew that it wasn't Angie's role. Her role was to be a mother, and yeah, so it left the door open, and it was just what was needed. And I think maybe that's what men are good for, of like having a little bit of that. And I'm not going to say it to toot my horn, but having a little bit of this superpower to step up and shoulder that in crisis.
Yeah.
We might be terrible at having to make plans for our kids and take out the trash and do the dishes and, schedule all these other events, during normal life. But I do think men can have a superpower to really step up in crisis and shoulder things for their family that they can't normally do. I remember the first night in the hospital, and it may be indicative of one of the first like conflicts Angie and I had during this period of grief. We realized things had changed for our family drastically and were changing. And I remember they do let you sleep in there, so we kind of had a couch and a chair that folded out. And despite everything Angie says about me, she says I snore. I don't think I do, but I remember waking up and hearing her cry, and being consoled by the nurse because she didn't know how I could sleep and snore through the situation. And I think we were exhausted from the day, but I do remember that as being super hurtful, but not anything I had done on purpose. And maybe it's one of those first conflicts of she wanted to be a mother, she wanted to be the parent, and didn't know how I could not also be there with her doing that.
Yeah. Dang, how did you guys handle that? Like, that's in one way you could say, someone's got to get some rest to be able to make these horrible decisions. I don't know.
Yeah. I I don't know. Me and Angie ended up getting a room in part of the Renew House, which is like a separate organization that provides housing for families in crisis. And so she was able to go there at night and get a little bit of like respite and rest outside of the situation. I stayed with Connor the entire week in the room. I think that's how we managed it. They were gracious enough to do that, and probably better for Angie and I to be separate and get what we needed in different ways to recharge for the day.
How long had you been married at this point when this all happened?
Gosh, I would have to do math.
Come on, you're an engineer. Don't act like you don't know
I
how to do math.
s- just under 10 years. It was closer to 9.
So you guys had a good amount of time being married before you had children. Yeah?
Yeah, I think so.
Nice. Okay. Mike and I had like a year married before
Okay.
we got pregnant.
No, we had like 4 or 5 years before we had Connor.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about like how difficult it is to navigate something like this, and then where you were at in your relationship. Were you a couple years married? Were you, under 10 years married? Up until that point, had you guys been through difficult things together?
Angie talked about her grandma passing, I think, on her episode of the podcast. Yeah, and so that was maybe my first glimpse at it, of seeing like how that was important, and a missed opportunity to support Angie in the right way at first, and then, trying to catch up and do that. Right before we moved away, we had friends who had a child who needed extra care before she ultimately passed away. That was a different opportunity to see Angie support their family in a special way. We moved to Michigan. I moved up here first, and Angie left her job at the same time, and then spent the next month just helping to care for that family's children while they were in the hospital with Lulu. So I think that was a glimpse to see like how passionate and how loving Angie can be towards others, and I think it was a probably a pretty neat gift that she got to do that and be present with them. All leading up to, we needed just as much care and support, within a couple of years. I don't think anybody knows it at the time, but you kind of probably live through those things and get a view into them. And then afterwards, the hindsight, you're like, it was good practice.
Not at all the same situation, but a year before my dad died, there was a tragic car accident with a kid in our neighborhood, and he was like just this young 19-year-old boy, the kid that everyone loved, the all-star, and he just died in a car accident really tragically. And he died February 8th, I think, and my dad died February 6th the following year. And we also had that weird experience of like supporting that family through the community, and then a year later being the family that needed that. But I do find that really interesting that you guys walked through that with a family a couple years before it happened with Connor. And then Angie was like 8 weeks pregnant with Sailor at the time, right?
Yeah.
What was that like, finding out that Sailor was a boy and going through a whole pregnancy, like literally within the days of Connor passing away? I just can't imagine that.
Yeah. I think it was probably toughest for Angie because I think the grief did things to her body that were, permanent. She's struggled with some health things afterwards that probably stem from going through this tragic event where grief really has physical effects while she was pregnant. That was hard. I think as a dad, and this is probably where the men thing was, I never really felt connected to my kids until they were born and came into the
Yeah.
world. And then you feel the connection differently. And I very want to recognize, I think that's different for moms. Like, I think that was different for Angie, where the connection that she starts to feel occurs much, much earlier.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, they're literally a part of us. It's so
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. And until you can hold that baby in your arms, like, I think that sometimes that's different for dads. And for me, that was different. Like, I felt that
Yeah.
connection after they got here. But I did have to watch her, like, even in the hospital, trying to find somebody to take her blood pressure because he wasn't feeling well. And it's scary to know, like, well, and we still had Holland, who's with us, but then also, like, you don't want anything to happen to the baby either, right? So still making sure that we're caring for Angie, and she was caring for herself at the time. I think it gets harder to not knowing that he's a boy and we've lost a kid, but I think after Sailor was born and watching Sailor grow up, like, there's a whole bunch of similarities between our kids. And Sailor very much has a lot of the visual traits, like, looks a lot like what Connor did as a baby. And I think that's maybe like the hardest of having the, like, blonde, shaggy hair that occurred later and maybe not at the moment for me.
Do you feel like Sailor has felt this pressure, or they lost their first son, I'm now the next one, like almost like this, not replacement, but do you see what I'm getting at, of like just this pressure of now I'm their only son? And I know he's young. How old is he? 10?
He's turning 10 in August.
Yeah.
I don't think he feels the pressure. I don't think as parents we're asking him to be Connor. I think
Yeah.
personality-wise, they are very different. I think visually, they look the same. But that's probably helpful that Sailor's personality is so different than what Connor's was. Those are probably better questions for Holland. I think Holland felt more of the pressure. When you talk about birth order and some of the personality traits that develops for kids, that was very real for Holland. Went from being the second to eventually transitioning to the first. Parents have, spoken or unspoken, probably different expectations for a firstborn and a secondborn, right? A second or a middle and then a lastborn, which is totally different. They get to do whatever the heck they want.
So true.
I think that question of, was there pressure put on a kid probably is more applicable to Holland as she transitioned to that firstborn, that oldest child, where she hadn't been there before, right? She always had somebody to look up to. She had always had somebody who was doing something first, or that other sibling that, they can mimic. And all of a sudden, within a week, for Holland, overnight, was gone.
Yeah. Jeez. Does she still talk about Connor? And like, I mean, how often do you guys, okay, let me ask you this. You said that the memory of those 5 days is like seared into your brain and that you think about it often, daily?
Daily.
Daily.
I really sat and admitted it. It's daily.
How often do you actually talk about this? Like, is this rare for you to be talking about this like we are right now? Do you guys talk about it as a family?
Ooh, I don't I don't think we talk about these details as a family. I am always happy to talk about my kids, all of them, all four of them. But as a family, we keep it pretty positive. And Connor's picture still lives on our mantle. Getting ready for Connor's fourth birthday, he wanted two things. He wanted a skateboard and he wanted a kite. The kite still lives in our garage and it's a little R2D2 thing. So pretty chintzy. But one of the special things that people did for us afterwards is they had a skateboard made for him and it has his name on it and it's beautiful. It's this beautiful wood by Beam Customs and it lives on our mantle and it says Connor on it. So pretty special. Those things are always present whenever we take family photos. We always carry a photo of Connor down there with us and he gets to be part of that still. I think in those ways, like my kids are going to know that he's always going to be present. He's always part of our lives and he's still very much one of our kids.
Why don't you talk about Connor more with your friends, with your colleagues? Do you think you put off the vibe that you don't want to talk about it? Or I don't know. I guess I wonder, like, when people are grieving, it's so hard to know how someone wants to be supported. And this is what I've talked about with the other two women that were on the podcast. I've felt sometimes like, should I bring this up? Like, I don't want to, quote, trigger someone when they're just trying to like do their job or get through a holiday. I don't know.
Yeah, a good question. If I'm honest, Dylan, like I will tell you that I want to talk about all my kids and I would love to talk about them. But I think it's still grief and it's still something that I probably deep down inside will avoid. Maybe one of the trigger questions we have is, how many kids do you have? Right? It's such an innocent question when you meet somebody new. I still will waffle on the answer. I don't want to hide Connor, but sometimes I just don't want to explain.
Yeah.
I'll put like a caveat in there. I'll do the asterisks. I'll be like, oh, I have 3 kids at home. You feel like then I don't have to explain it and they're probably not going to catch the little trigger, but then it kind of protects you as a dad from feeling like I'm forgetting about my 4th kid.
Yeah.
It's not that. It's usually like, I don't want to stop and explain to somebody. Now, if it's somebody who has like built trust or like there's some relationship there, then yes, you can kind of make the judgment call of saying, am I going to tell them that I have 1 child in heaven and 3 at home? Or, like, what are you going to say in that situation? For the people who know that Connor has passed or, they find out and they ask a question, that's where I really do lean into. I am always happy to talk about all my kids. I remember at work and people that knew we had lost a kid and somebody apologizing, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bring it up. And I think that's no, it's okay to bring it up. It's okay to ask about my kid. I'm happy to talk about him and tell you, the songs he would sing and the toys he played with and things like that. I'd love it. I'd love to remember Connor. But it still feels selective of when do I want to explain. And I think that's the awkward part. The big hill to get over is just to say, I have 1 kid in heaven or a kid passed away. Sometimes once you can clear that, then it gets really easy to talk about the rest. But that feels like the biggest hurdle just to get that one sentence out and not knowing how to phrase it.
Angie explained how 10 years later, you guys are interacting with people that might not have been that close to you 10 years ago. And so they might not know at the forefront that you lost a child. Whereas maybe 10 years ago, 8 years ago, it was probably so present for everyone,
Yeah.
And so I want to kind of go back to so Connor passes away. Walk me through the first 3 months of that for you guys, because you had to return to work. You had a pregnant wife. You had a freaking toddler. Like, you shouldered the 5 days in a lot of ways through some logistical things. And then you guys go home. Like, what do you even remember?
Yeah.
Did you black out?
That's what I would say. As vivid as the 5 days in the hospital are for me, this time period you're asking about, complete blur.
Yeah.
Like, you remember some things around the funeral and like everybody who came in for it, but the answer is I don't know. There's probably a lot of survival within there.
Yeah.
There's always going to be glimpses that stand out, but generally that 3 to 6 months afterwards was a pretty big blur. So I do remember we took an opportunity to get away. I think we kind of just packed our bags and really quickly went down to Florida. for about a week, which sounds simple, but we needed the time to get out of our space. And
Yeah.
I think things like that can be really helpful during times of grief. It was really helpful for Angie and I just to like get out of the house that, you've built a family in, and that family isn't the same anymore. And so
Mhm.
go do something where you're kind of on neutral ground. You get to be with each other. You get to be with Holland again, but not have the haze or the dark cloud kind of hanging over you. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, but we never undid Connor's room. Even eventually after we had Sailor moved into that room with Connor stuff. Angie didn't want to touch it. She wanted it to be the way it was and with the things it had, and that was an important place for us to maintain and keep it.
Yeah. Wow. How long did you have off work before you had to return? Do you remember?
I do, but I was off for 2 weeks, and that was a week in the hospital and the week after.
Oh my
But
gosh.
But Dylan, you say that, but you don't know what the right answer is.
Oh, it just sounds
You don't
yeah.
you don't know. Whirlpool had just done some restructuring. I think we were in the hospital on Sunday, but the Monday I had a new boss. I had to call a new boss on Monday and be like, I'm in the hospital with my kid. And then, by Thursday you're calling and saying, hey, my child has passed away.
Oh my gosh.
If it had been another 10 years and I was in a very different place, I would have probably taken more time. Right? But you don't know what the right amount of time is. You don't know
Sure.
how to handle it. And it felt like some normalcy of going back to work.
I was gonna say, was there somewhat of a relief to it? Of like, I don't have to be like again, kind of on neutral ground. I can go to an office. I don't have to be in the house. I can like do something and not just be overwhelmed by my grief.
Yeah. And I think it's the do something. Like it becomes a distraction. I know how work is supposed to work. So I'm going to go here. Maybe it became a little bit of that respite for me of
Mhm.
work was work. And so, yeah, you got out of the space and you went and did what you knew you had to do and you knew you were supposed to do. Where
Yeah.
everything else for us was uncertain.
Yeah. Angie had mentioned that like a coworker wrote you a letter or someone wrote you a letter.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Oh, absolutely. I still have it. I should
Oh,
almost pulled it out, but it's a keeper.
yeah.
It's a keeper. I think there are things that stood out going back to work. I remember two ladies that came up to me kind of the first day and they just wanted to hug me.
Yeah.
And they asked. They said, "Can we give you a hug?" And they came up at two different times, so it's not like it was this weird three-way hug, but
Important details.
like yeah, it was quiet and it was symbolic of, "Hey, you are supported and loved by people who I really hadn't interacted with yet, but awkward, but I think appreciated." The other things that stand out are you always feel like you're being looked at or stared at.
I bet.
People at the end of the hallway, like you catch their glances and you're like, are they talking about me? Or like, and that's where I'd rather people just ask or, come in and acknowledge something with like a quiet hug or like I don't know what else that might look like. Because you don't always have to be hugged, but I think just the acknowledgement rather than the not knowing what to say, and then just staying quiet and not acknowledging it just felt awkward. So to answer your question about Zach, leading up to having Connor, I had some coworkers. We were all having kids at the same time. So one was older and he had already had a kid, and so Zach and I were having our first, and Jason got to give us some of that like dad advice, right?
Yeah.
And so I remember times of going to lunch with those three and getting coached through what was going to be like and some things like that. And so Zach, he's the second coworker who was also having a kid at the same time, is who wrote me a letter.
Hmm.
And he didn't deliver it at work. I remember doing yard work and seeing him drive by and thought, that's strange because he doesn't live around my neighborhood. And then later in the day, Zach came back and eventually gave me the letter. And I think that was Zach too, not knowing if this is the right thing, like almost
Mm.
chickening out, right? Like he saw me, he
Yeah.
wanted to deliver it. He didn't want to see me. He
Yeah.
just wanted to stick it in the mailbox but then I was out and it got to be real awkward. So he drove away like a teenage boy. But it doesn't matter what the letter said. It ultimately, like, it was super kind and there was a lot of acknowledgement and feeling inside. But I think the act was more important. The act of being seen was more important.
Why do you think that like, it feels like such a rare thing for this to have happened, right? Like, wow, this man wrote you a letter, well, I don't know if it was handwritten, but like delivered a letter to your house
It was handwritten.
handwritten, acknowledging seeing you. And that's so beautiful, but it feels so rare. Like, why? Why do you think that is for you men? You
I got
complicated species.
Dylan. I don't know if I can answer that because I think, look, I think there are men who are really good at it, and kudos for Zach for putting himself out there.
Yeah.
I think it was really uncomfortable for him. It was clearly uncomfortable for him.
Yeah. Interesting.
I don't know if I ever told him like how important it was to me.
Are you
I'm
going to
not.
send him this podcast so that he knows?
Maybe I should. I'm not sure that I'm that good at it. In fact, I should even say that I'm not sure. I am not good at it. Where Angie shines and she talked about it, now she can step in and she can fill this role and support other people who are also going through a similar journey. Admittedly, I'm awful at it. Like I still don't think I could write somebody a letter like that. Getting ready for this podcast too, even brings up some like missed opportunities of I know what I should be doing for people who are going through some hard things. And one comes to mind in particular whose teenage son is sick. And I think there's a lot of fear, or there's a lot of, I know that I should be there and I should be writing the letter and I should be calling and I should be asking, and I can't. And I'm not sure why that is. But I'm probably also fearful that, it's been months since I reached out again, and then you're fearful for like what the new news is. It's part of how this has changed you, or like we can know the right thing to do, and it still makes it hard. It still makes it super awkward and difficult to reach out and support people who need to be supported.
Do you feel like that's always kind of how it's been? Like it's always been something that's hard for you? Or do you feel like it became exponentially harder after going through your own trauma and tragic loss?
I don't think I don't care for emotions. It's not how I was raised.
I don't care for emotion. That's going in a clip. That's got to be that's a promotion clip. I don't care for emotions.
I think, we've experienced a lot of emotions now.
Sure.
Shoot, now I don't even remember what the question was.
Sorry.
Said that.
You hate emotions. You probably hate therapists.
No, therapists are pretty good. You're a little expensive, but you are extremely helpful. I don't think I was ever emotional. I think having gone through this and experienced emotions, it does put up a lot of walls to wanting to go through those again. And that's probably who I am. I've continued to kind of put those emotions off and not wanting to relive them.
Yeah. So it's a protective factor. I think that's what I was getting at. Like, is this a protective response to protect you and your nervous system? Where now when tragic happens to other people, it's still too close, too triggering.
Yeah. I think it is, right? And that gets us back to, you've experienced them, you've lived them, you know what they're going through, but it's a fear of being brought back into it yourself.
Yeah. Okay, so walk me through, like, how have you, I don't want to say gotten through this, because like you said, you don't get through it. It just shifts and changes and evolves, and it's just complicated. It's a big ball of mess. But like, have you done therapy? Have you guys done couples therapy? Like, I know she had mentioned that you guys went on a retreat and read a book, but I guess I'm wondering, like, what was your experience like with needing support?
So we didn't do couples therapy. We both, I think, sought people individually. But I saw a therapist and he was great. And I think, you start and you're like, why am I even here? I think I started being encouraged by Angie. Angie talked about anger being one of the emotions that I did experience. And so I think being encouraged to go and talk through it with another male figure. And it was important that it was going to be another male. And it was good. It took longer than I thought. Like, you sit there and you go for weeks and weeks and you don't get anywhere. You know what I mean? Eventually things start to unravel and you kind of get to the emotion and you get to the root cause of feelings or anger or whatever the root cause of that grief is. And it's more complicated. Like, you could say the root cause of the grief is, well, Connor passed away, but that is a really simple way of putting what happened, right? So incredibly helpful. Yeah. You could give it a lot of time. I think you have to give it time. It's also difficult because you have to relive all of this. You have to build a relationship with that person that you're asking to go see and to help you, but you've got to build this trust with them for them to then help you, right? Like, it's not something, it's a one and done conversation. It's hours and hours and hours to build trust and understand who you are and who your family is, and then how they can help.
Yeah, I think that's a good point with therapy because, and everyone's different too. I find that some people, it's just easier for them to make the connection. They just are ready, like busting to like just share everything. And for someone like you, who maybe needs more of that like simmering before you really open up and feel comfortable and safe, might be more of a slow burn. And, I've had parents be like, oh, well, she's been coming to you for so long and she's not fixed yet, and it's like, well, that's not like exactly how it works. So then a lot of times everyone has their own experience, their own different needs and goals of what they want to get out of therapy and their personality of how comfortable they are going to be to start really opening it up and where they're at. Like how much do they even know going into therapy to start with? Like I'm sure you hadn't done therapy before this, right?
No.
Meanwhile, I
Yeah.
grew up going to therapy. I was raised by a therapist. Like Mike was raised by a therapist.
Like I thought you'd go in there and like lay down and put your head on a pillow and you'd like
Yeah.
awkwardly sit in the corner and ask you questions about your family of origin. But like that's not how it is at all.
How long did you go to therapy for?
I think it was like 10 weeks. And even then probably shouldn't have stopped, but I was like, oh, I don't want to pay for this anymore. But
Yeah.
I think even 10 weeks was incredibly helpful and broke down some barriers and some walls that had definitely been put up.
How did this affect your marriage with Angie?
Spent a lot of time in the last week thinking about that, like as we get ready for this, and like how even did Angie and I stay together? Because I think a very real possibility that this was such a big crisis that it drove a wedge between us.
Oh,
Um,
100%.
I'll talk again about, I experienced anger, a lot of it, and it wasn't necessarily angry at the situation, but it was just that was the bubbling emotion, and Angie took a brunt of it. Like that's the hard thing of when you are married, like subconsciously that you can be awful or say mean things to that person that you love that said those vows with you because they're going to forgive you.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Angie had to take some of that just to help work through it. That's hard and it's awful, but that was a challenging part. Like I do remember just days where you're angry and you're just angry at your spouse, but for no reason. It's not like they did anything,
Yeah.
but I think it was the deflection of anger about, losing a child or the situation that you put on somebody who can absorb it
Yeah.
and take it for a while. So she deserves a lot of credit for having grace and patience and forgiveness for things like that. How we remained together, we still had a child that was central to our lives that needed to be cared for. We still had Holland, and I think that was probably one of the things that held us together. We still have this child that we very much love, that both of us love, that we created together, and that child needed help just as much as we did, right? She was going through her own grief and her own change, and that was probably central to helping us get through it, of having that common place together. The other thing, and I don't know if Angie talked about it, is that whole year, 2016, started with the death of our son and ended with the birth of Sailor.
Yeah.
But Sailor, we didn't have an easy, normal pregnancy with Sailor. And
Right.
so, the 6 months between then, or 5 months between then, were riddled with more doctor's appointments. And, we ended that year with another 5 weeks in a NICU as Sailor was born early and needed extra care to get out of there. And Dillan, I think, as tragic as all of that is, they probably became events that we knew we could only get through together. I think it would be very different if we didn't have another kid, right? We could have ended up in a completely different place. If you didn't have Holland, if you didn't have Sailor on the way that needed two parents to come together and be that care and support for them.
Yeah.
There's a picture from when we were in the hospital at DeVos that somebody took without us knowing. It's Angie and I leaning over Connor's bed, and it's black and white, and she has her arm around me. And I think I said to her one time, like, Angie, I don't remember you putting your arm around me in the hospital. She's like, I think that was the only way I was going to be able to stand next to our kid. I was physically using you to hold me up, getting us through those events from Connor's death to Sailor's birth. There was a lot of physical and emotional support from one another to hold each other up.
Yeah. And I think that's what you talked about earlier of like sometimes in a marriage, one person can support more than the other or have skills that lean more towards the situation than the latter. But like your guys' situation is so complicated because Connor's death wasn't the only thing that you went through that year. And on top of all of the other medical things that came up with Sailor and with Angie and your grief and Holland's grief, like it's just a tornado of events. And like, do you feel like you had to table some of your own stuff to just be like, Angie's carrying a child and Holland? Like, I don't know.
I don't know how I'd answer that question. I definitely think your capacity for dealing with other things change. Your capacity for having additional relationships changes. And it changes and it gets reduced. I think capacity for having friendships and maintaining relationships with a whole bunch of people outside of marriage and a family shrinks during these times. And that gets hard. And that's where that community, that group that you built prior to crisis becomes so important that they're willing to stay around and support without that relationship being reciprocated.
Mm-hmm.
Because unfortunately, there's a lot of take of like during these times of crisis, right? You have to just be willing to take what people are giving, knowing that like that's what they feel like they can do to help.
Mm-hmm. Was it hard for you to take help?
I think it was really hard, especially around Connor. I think it got easier for Sailor of knowing like you've been through this. Sometimes you just have to ask, or people offer something, maybe not really meaning it, and you're like, oh yeah, that'd be great.
Actually, yes, thanks.
Yeah.
And could you also?
I do remember like a coworker when we were at Bronson with Sailor had said like, if you need to stay, like you can stay. And I was like, actually, I do need to stay. And he was like, okay, well, let me go figure out how to make that happen. So I was like, can I stay this weekend? So
That's amazing.
because I was driving to see Angie all the time during the week and trying to stay up there on the weekends. And so yeah, I was like, yeah, actually.
I love giving help. I don't always love accepting help. And I'm a female, but I feel like sometimes with men and the ego a little bit of like, no, I got this,
Sure.
But then in a situation like that, like everything's stripped from you. Like you literally, you couldn't survive without the help from everyone.
Yeah. You have to learn it, right? I was not willing to accept as much help with Connor as I was, 5 months later. Where you're kind of broken down and you're like, yeah, I'll take what I can get.
Mm-hmm. When we talk about mental health and like your mental health, like how would you say, I don't know, that you are doing? That's a really vague and loaded question. I want to know, like, and again, don't have to answer this, but like, did you take medication? Like, you went to therapy? Do you feel like you went through a depression? Why anger? I want this to be encouraging for the majority of women will listen to this podcast, but I want them to then either be able to help support the men in their lives that maybe this isn't super easy for them with emotions and feelings. But also I would like a man to listen to be like, okay, this guy went through this and he went to therapy, right?
I'll tell you that I struggle with anxiety. And I think that's been a big part of my life after Connor. And I think it comes from fear. Not fear that something is directly going to happen to me, but fear that I can't control what happens to my family.
Yeah.
You think you build this foundation, and it doesn't matter, how I feed my family and the roof I build over their heads and, all the sports I let my kids do and all the experiences they do. But like that anxiety comes from the fear of knowing that none of that stuff matters, that something can still happen, that foundation can still ultimately disappear nearly overnight. And I think that makes me anxious, and that's driven a lot of anxiety in my life afterwards. I do see a great doctor, but take medication for it. And I don't know if I've ever actually told anybody that before. I have a friend who said something in front of a bunch of guys. I think he had just started taking some anxiety medication, and he's like, yeah, Patrick, don't you take it too? I was like, do not bring me into this. Like, I didn't want to talk about it with anybody. I'd probably still wouldn't if we were on this podcast, but it is a real thing. For me, I think it comes from the fear of knowing that something can happen to my family. Like, and I can't be in control of that.
Yeah. So do you feel like you were an anxious person before this happened with Connor, or that all came after Connor?
Yeah, I think I was always a worrier, but the severity changed after.
Sure. Are you a firstborn? You're a firstborn, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
Out of 2. Oh, you just have one brother.
Yeah, just the one.
Okay, he was
And
orchestra.
yeah, he plays the violin. We don't look anything alike.
The
He's
redhead.
musically gifted, and I am not.
How many years apart are you guys?
7.
Wow. Intentionally 7 years?
I don't know. You'd have to ask my mom.
We don't talk about that.
Think she'll join your podcast?
I need to have every VanAntwerp on this podcast. I want to have Holland on the podcast at some point. I think she called me the podcast lady.
Yeah.
To Angie. She was like, oh, is the podcast lady speaking at Storyline or something? It's like, I'm the podcast lady.
Did you ever know you were going to be the podcast lady? We were talking about anxiety.
Anxiety. Yes. Okay. So I was thinking firstborn son. I've like run anxious all my life. And I realized like I did lose my dad at 10. I have a lot of anxiety about losing a child. I have a lot of anxiety about losing Mike. My dad died when he was 48 and Mike's going to be 48 next year. And I just kind of am like, actually he's going to be 48 this year, the last day of this year. But I'm like, I need you to be 49. Like I have to get through that like 48, you know? And then I'm sure I'll have a lot of anxiety when I am that age and many, many years.
It's funny how that becomes a barrier. Like I remember going through those same barriers with, raising the other kids of, Holland turning 4 and feeling like we cleared that. And then Sailor turning 4 and you're like, oh, I cleared that one too. Like those, I get it. That becomes like a very real barrier we put in our own heads of like, we just have to get past this.
Yeah.
It'll be okay.
Yeah. How do you feel like the anxiety lives in your body?
Sometimes it's just a low hum. And sometimes it prevents you from getting anything done in the day. Like where the worry, the stress of something else, like those reliving those moments in the hospital for me, like are just so powerful that you can't get anything else done. Right. And then that's hard. I think that anxiety can also live in the form of irritability. You're going through a period of being highly anxious, and then that is projected as irritability on people in my family, whether that's Angie or my kids. Once you come out of those periods, I think there's guilt for some of that irritability. You remember you're not in control, but in the period of time, like it very much just seems like dad's a grumpy, or sometimes it's hard of knowing, hey, I got to a place that isn't healthy and it manifests itself on your family.
Do you do anything to help with that? Like, do you work out? Do you have hobbies? Do you go do a golf league? Like, do you have anything that kind of supports that in a way that's not like I'm taking a medication or I'm going to a therapist?
Yeah. I have come in and out of hobbies and things that I really enjoyed that I think are helpful. I don't do some of those anymore, but I think it's just because I've entered a different season of life where I'm focused on some different things, and time seems to be a precious commodity that we don't have enough of.
Well, you're getting up at 4:30 every morning.
I know. You're absolutely right. We used to have a group of friends that played disc golf. That was a really fun hobby. You get out with the other dads and it's low cost and time to chat, no pressure, but it's not something I do anymore. It's definitely something I enjoyed. That was one of those things of, Connor got to come along and do that as a first son. Like, because, Angie's working, you're like, oh, what do I do with my kid? Well, I guess I'm just going to bring him on the thing I like to do. At first it was in a stroller, and then eventually he started to play. And sometimes he'd only play if you fed him fruit snacks, but
doesn't matter.
Yeah. You got to walk, Connor, and then got to walk for fruit snacks. I probably don't have a lot of hobbies, actually. Disc golf is the one that stands out. That used to be an escape. I have worked out, but I don't find that like the escape. Like that's not the endorphin rush that solves problems for me. So that I find to be helpful on the physical standpoint. Like it makes me feel better physically.
Yeah, but it's not really doing anything for you emotionally.
No.
Yeah, I find it to be so helpful with anxiety. Like if you're anxious, you just go walk it off. You go do a little run. I'm like a high rev person. It's like regulating to me, if that makes sense, Sure.
I get it. I would not be caught dead running, so it's like my least favorite exercise.
Don't knock it till you try it.
I've tried it and I look like a fool.
Well, never say never, maybe is what I'm going to say. Never say not again. I got Mike into running and so
then he broke his foot.
Yeah, but that was not through that.
Fun.
You were
That's
just
so
blaming it. You know, his wife talked him into that running and he
That's
broke
what
his
I
leg.
thought.
I will say I broke my finger last summer on our boat and Mike was driving. And so he technically kind of broke my finger is what I like to say. So
You make sure you don't let him forget it.
no, I will never. And I gave him all the hospital bills. We've been talking for a while. We got to land this ship.
There are a couple of things that I think are important for men to know.
Yeah, let's talk about these men.
So crisis happens. And before I think you can, as the victims of that crisis, even start grieving, people around you have already started grieving. And they're done before the dust settles and before you even know what the heck is going on. I think that can be hard. And so looking back, or other men that are going through this, or have friends that are going through this, like realize that, like, you're going to grieve, as that friend, you're going to grieve for them, but that might end for you well before they even get there and well before they even know what they need. And so sometimes going through the grief journey for us, it felt lonely because everybody asked and circled up and did everything for us early. But, 3, 4, 5 weeks in, when you're really feeling it, they might already be done. And then that starts to feel pretty lonely because they're not like continuing to ask at that point. Right.
Yeah.
But the grief for us lasted a lot longer than that. Something else, and I think it goes along with this, is like, don't offer to do anything. Just do something. I told you that I even struggle with this. It is super easy to say, Dillan, if there's anything I can do, let me know.
Yeah.
But it comes back to like, I don't know. Like that person going through grief doesn't know what they need. But just doing something, just dropping off a note. Angie talked about like cleaning somebody's car. Like it might not be the right thing, but it's something. And that's the part that I think matters.
Yeah.
That's the part that really makes a difference for somebody.
Yeah, I agree with that. Even the asking puts that person in a position to have to do one more thing, right? They have to A, think about, well, what do I need? B, then they have to ask, which is awkward for some people. And C, they don't even know half the time. So mowing someone's lawn, taking them a coffee, cleaning out their car. It's so simple.
It sounds simple. It's also super hard to do.
Yeah.
It is super hard to do sometimes.
I don't know. I feel like it's one of those things that feels so hard because there's all this pressure around it. But when you take all that away, it feels like it doesn't have to be that hard. Unless you're someone like you, it's a very complicated situation if you're trying to support someone else who's gone through this. Like it's way more emotional for you than it would be for maybe me.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Because why do you think it's hard?
I know what I need to be doing for, this old friend who's going through something with his kid, but it's hard just to get started. And maybe that's the hardest part. If I just started writing a letter or picking up the phone and dialing, then it becomes easy. And I'm sure you'd all be in a better place on the back end after it was done. You'd feel more loved, which is important.
Do you think it's your own, you kind of alluded to this, like it's your own shame spiral or embarrassment of the fact that you haven't done it soon enough. And so therefore you just keep putting it off and then it just gets longer and longer. And then it feels like, oh, I can't even do that now because I've not reached out in 6 months.
Yeah, probably.
But then that's the shame spiral that we have to be like, well, screw that. It's better than not ever doing it, The shame spiral is kind of like you in your own head are stopping something good from happening because of some arbitrary thing that you think you look bad. But the point is that if you keep not doing it, then you keep feeding that negative reinforcement of like, see, you're a bad friend. You didn't reach out. And then it just gets longer and longer and longer as opposed to just being like, I'm going to reach out now, then that's going to matter. And I can say, hey, I'm sorry I haven't reached out. It was hard for me to do that, but I've been thinking about you and you've been on my mind.
Are you going to charge me for this?
Yes.
It's perfect. Like you've worded it perfectly.
This is why we get paid so much money, Patrick. But I think it would actually be kind of badass if you actually did text your friend or call your friend that you're thinking about today, like after this podcast, as like your next step forward. I'm going to do this.
Okay. Hold me accountable.
Okay, I will.
What else do I think men should know? If I'm talking to the men that are supporting somebody else, it's okay to know that as you're reaching out to do something, you're likely going to be rejected. I had a whole bunch of friends planning a disc golf weekend where they were going to go for a long day and play. We weren't very far into this grief journey. And like my answer was continuing like, no. Like, I think I just wanted to be alone.
Yeah.
Right. And they kept asking in a kind way, like, hey, your invitation's still good. And it was the night before. And I was like, can I still go? I think that's important to know. Like, leave the door open for that person as long as possible.
Mm.
Because it was great to go with those guys and just, have some normalcy. I needed that group to leave that door open to the last minute
Yeah.
because I was going to say no all the way up until then. And I think that felt really good to know that they cared enough to be like, yeah, come join in. Like, we'll make room.
Yeah.
Yeah. Expect to be rejected, but then continue to be there. I think back to the Britons often, who were one of our families that walked along with us, and some moments that we've probably been most vulnerable with Chris, of even like day one in the hospital, giving him a hug and letting him hold me up for the 30 seconds while I cried. Like, one of the very few times I think where you show a lot of emotion, being thankful that he was there and willing to do that and accept that hug. I don't really like to be touched. I don't really like to give hugs, but the time that you do need it,
Mm-hmm.
being there. They continue to walk alongside us. We don't interact as closely as we have in the past, but they're always there. They continue to be there, celebrate Connor's birthday. If we wanted them to make a cake, we might wait till the last minute and say, hey, can you make a cake for us? And they would still do it.
Mm.
It's almost like they know, like, oh, there's a box of cake and a box of frosting in the pantry, because the VanAntwerps aren't going to think about a birthday until the very last second.
Yeah.
But that's the capacity of somebody who's in grief, I think, of, sometimes they aren't capable or they don't want to consciously or subconsciously think until the very last minute. So
Yeah.
like, I know I'm always going to say, I don't want to celebrate Connor's birthday this year, or I don't want to go do anything for it. I'd rather be alone. And I'm usually forced by Angie to go do something. But I'm always thankful on the back end that we did,
Mm.
and always thankful to have friends that'll let us do that thing last minute. And I think that's okay. I think as those people that are supporting, again, it's the expect to be rejected, but leave that door open as long as you can.
Every year might be different. Some years the birthday might really hit you, and some years it might be not as intense.
Mm-hmm.
I think when we have these expectations of it has to look like this, that's when we get into trouble, because then we force ourselves into something that maybe doesn't feel true, or it doesn't have to be true every year. I don't know. How are you feeling right now? This is a lot.
I'd rather talk about it than not talk about it at all. The good and the bad. And sometimes it takes a little bit to get it rolling, but then, once we're in conversation, I think it's healthy to go back through it. This has been interesting to be on the podcast. You've dug down to kind of some of the whys. And so not just what happened, but digging down and forcing me to think about some of the whys and some of the real emotions that we went through. Even healthy to hear Angie's version of the podcast. Like, I thought that was super interesting listening to it, because we don't talk about all these things all the time. It was great to hear what she does to get through it. And I think, yeah, she did a great job. This was like a little facilitation of, talking about some of the things that we experience and we don't talk to each other about.
Yeah. She had mentioned this teeter-totter of when two parents are grieving. It can be so isolating because of your love for Angie or her love for you. She doesn't want to burden you with her pain, and you don't want to burden her with your pain. So it kind of leaves you guys on your own little islands struggling, which I get, but at the same time, then we don't want to create distance between you two. We want you guys to be able to come together. I'm saying we, but you know what I mean? Like, the idea is to be able to come together through all of that, which is why divorce is so common after you've lost a child, because it can be so separating. So I think it's really impressive that you guys have fought through together. These 3 other kids that are in your home are awesome children that are different and dynamic and cool and living life. And it's a heart-wrenching and beautiful story. It makes me cry every time. I've thought about you guys so much over the years. I was very moved and changed by your story.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
So 10 years later, for you guys to be on my podcast is pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. I think it's difficult as adults to deal with grief and understanding loss, but we talk about how neat our children are. You've got 3 beautiful children. I've got 3 beautiful children at home and 1 in heaven. But they have like a special way of seeing how simple it is too. And after Connor passed away, we got to hear his classmates. They weren't sad. They had been taught like how special Jesus was, and their ultimate goal in their heads is to get to heaven. And they were like, why should we be sad? Connor went to a better place. I think our kids are pretty special for understanding that. We should be happy for them.
Yeah.
And we should be. We should be happy for them. Who knew the man would talk all like beyond our time limit?
You're the first man that's been on the podcast, which is a big deal.
Well, I hope I met expectations for you.
You exceeded expectations. And obviously, I asked a lot from both you and Angie to come on here and share the worst part of your life. This conversation matters, and it's going to exist for many people to benefit from. And I hope that a lot of men will, I don't know, find clarity and guidance and comfort in hearing your words from an
Oh,
engineer.
thank you. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Dillan.
Oh, thank you so much for listening. What stands out from this conversation is how much grief can be happening beneath the surface. Patrick talked about returning to work, making impossible decisions, carrying anxiety, going to therapy, trying out medication, feeling anger, and trying to stay present for his wife and children while also grieving his son. And that's why I think these conversations matter. Because mental health isn't just a list of symptoms. It's not just anxiety, depression, trauma, or grief written on a page. It's the way a dad answers a question, how many kids do you have? It's the way someone can look functional at work but feel like their whole foundation has been shaken. It's the way anxiety can show up as irritability, or how anger can be grief with nowhere to go. It's the way someone can love their family so deeply and feel terrified that they can't protect them from everything. These stories give us language, compassion. They help us understand ourselves and each other with more nuance. They make all those clinical terms come to life. And one of the biggest takeaways from Patrick's story is that support can't only show up in the first few days, weeks, even months. Grief isn't over when the funeral is over. It's not over when someone goes back to work. Man, it's not even over when 10 years have passed and the whole world assumes life has moved on. If you're supporting someone who's grieving, especially a man who may not know how to ask for help, don't wait for the perfect words. Don't wait until you know exactly what to do. Just do something small and real. Send them a text, write a letter, drop off coffee, mow the lawn, clean out their car, say their child's name. Tell them that you remember. It doesn't fix anything necessarily, but it becomes a message that says, I see you, I haven't forgotten, and you're not alone. And if you're the one grieving, if your grief has come out upside down, sideways as anger, anxiety, numbness, avoidance, or silence, I really hope this episode reminds you that you're not broken. You're carrying something heavy, and you don't have to carry it alone. Patrick and Angie, thank you both for trusting this audience with Connor James VanAntwerp, with your story, his story, and how his life, while way too short, has had profound impact. Thank you for sharing the parts of grief that are harder to say out loud. And to everyone listening, please may we become the kind of people who remember, who reach out, and who keep showing up long after the first wave of support is gone. Thank you for listening.